Hello, and welcome to our online event, Is Culture the Untapped Ally for Climate Action? This event is part of the Scottish Government's Climate Ambition Zone at the Lighthouse during COP26, and we're delighted to be here today. My name is Ewan Hislop. I'm Head of Technical Research and Science at Historic Environment Scotland, and a founding co-chair of the Climate Heritage Network, an international organisation of over 250 members from across the arts, culture and heritage sectors to connect and amplify voices of the contribution that culture can make to addressing climate change and supporting climate action. It's my great pleasure today to be chairing this event. And our programme today, we have 6 inspiring speakers from across the arts and culture sector, but also including some voices from outside of our sector, to give us their views on the role of culture in climate action. We'll then be having a discussion panel with the speakers who can be with us live to answer your questions and take a deeper dive into the topic at hand. We're delighted to have so many people with us today. The attendees this morning, we were looking at numbers of over 430 registered for this event. So we're delighted that so many people have shown enthusiasm to join us, and you're all very welcome. And we hope to see you participating in the Q&A, which we'll pick up later on. But before we start to hear from our speakers, we're delighted to be launching today a short film created by a collaboration of cultural bodies in Scotland, designed to send a powerful message about the role of arts, cultural and heritage in climate action. The film is called Climate Action Needs Culture, and we're delighted to be able to give it its first screening at this event today. I hope you enjoy it.
From birth to death, the stories we tell shape the way we see the world. Some positive, some negative, some clouded with misinformation. Right now, we're seeing a world that's changing in unprecedented ways. I grew up in Scotland, but my family comes from Nigeria, so cultural heritage means a lot to me. I've also seen firsthand the devastating impact of our changing climate. When the nations of the world come together in Glasgow, what will be the stories we tell of COP26? Reaching net zero in a world adapted to a changed climate will require massive global transformation. Changes to society and lifestyle that for many are hard to imagine. But without culture providing a new positive vision of the future, can we actually create it? The pictures on our screens still reinforce lifestyles which make high carbon living normal and aspirational. These stories need to change, as the story of slavery has changed. Without new stories, we risk repeating the mistakes of the past and are failing to adapt to the future. Is culture the secret weapon for climate policy makers? A powerful force to shift society's embedded thinking and transform the status quo that's only working for a small minority. Artists, historians, librarians and curators think differently. They bring different imaginations, skills and experiences that can help other professionals think outside the usual boxes. Art and culture is not only a mirror to hold up to society, but as Brecht said, a hammer with which to shape it. Museums, galleries, libraries and historic environments, These powerful memory institutions help us understand previous transitions in society. They remind us that things haven't always been the way they are today, and have the power to paint a new vision of the future. People come together in cultural spaces to explore, learn, and think differently. To think collectively. Big cultural spaces can help us think bigger. And small community spaces provide practical knowledge and resources for local adaptation and resilience. Spaces where people learn new skills and rediscover old ones, where they debate new ideas and share traditional wisdom. Economists, scientists and politicians can't fix the climate emergency on their own. They can't change the way people think, and that's what's required. Climate change needs culture change, and cultural players are waiting to help. Armed with powerful skills, resources and audiences. So let's harness their energy and commitment by bringing culture front and centre to climate policy. Let's use our amazing cultural spaces to support a bold and just transition. Decisions over the next decade will shape the future of humanity. The choice to exclude our cultural resources or embrace them could be the most important story of them all.
Is culture the secret weapon for climate policy makers? Well, I think you'll agree with me that that was a very powerful film, advocating the fact that climate change needs culture action. And that's really what we're here to discuss today. We're going to hear from our speakers examples of the relevance of culture and art and heritage in reaching audiences and communicating and engaging on climate change. But I think one of the big aims for us today is to discuss and get to grips with how can we bring culture front and center. I think we don't want it to be a secret weapon. We want it to be out there, front and center, as we heard in the film. So I think that's really where we want to get to today. So we'll kick off with our first speaker today. And we're delighted to have a contribution from Dave Ray. Dave is Professor of Carbon Management at Edinburgh University and is Director of the Edinburgh Climate Change Institute. And for many people involved nationally in climate change in Scotland, Dave is a very prominent and influential figure. So we're absolutely delighted that he agreed to give us a contribution today. So let's take it away. Dave, please.
As we approach probably the most important climate change meeting arguably there's ever been, one of the key things which is been made apparent actually for decades is there's a real risk that, again, COP26, like previous COPs, is yes focused on what national government's doing and big business, but actually misses the biggest lever in sustainable climate action, which is people, and particularly cultural organisations. Their role is going to be crucial at COP and is already crucial in terms of climate action here in Scotland and right around the world. One of the best examples we've seen in the run up to COP26, the climate beacons. So they're cultural organisations within Scotland who've teamed up with climate organisations on that community level to, I suppose, give that voice in terms of how communities are wanting to take action on climate change, but giving it through that lens of what actually works and is sustainable from the perspective of those individuals and those communities. More importantly, building a legacy of action that goes way beyond COP26, a legacy that allows asking those difficult questions like the cultural sector is so good at doing. Asking, that's a great idea, for instance, from climate scientists like me, asking actually what will that mean in terms of achieving a just transition for communities? Does it really reflect on what we know of the kind of the history and the heritage of the areas that are taking the climate action? The arts have always been brilliant, actually, at asking the most difficult questions with challenges that national governments, that big business, that the world has faced. It's never been more important with the climate challenge that those questions are asked, but also that cultural organisations, the arts, the humanities, actually are front and centre in translating, yes, good science and good evidence. We kind of know what we need to do, and it's a lot, but actually translating that into what it means on the ground, what it means for people, for communities, what it means in terms of action today, but actually that legacy in 2050, when we should have got to net zero, actually still being in a position where we've got sustainable livelihoods, we've got a much better Scotland, a much better world, a fairer one, and one that really has learned from mistakes of the past, and there have been many, and actually use that voice of cultural organisations of the arts and humanities to make that resilient, just transition to net zero a reality.
Thank you very much to Dave. A fascinating contribution, I think, from one of our leading climate scientists. So someone from outside the culture sector, hearing their perspectives. And I think a very strong message there about the need for people and culture and the role of our sector to give voice to communities and to be able to challenge as well and make that voice heard. Very, very interesting. Thank you very much to Dave Ray for that. Our next contribution is from Anna Hodgart. We're delighted Anna can join us today. Anna is a theatre producer who's worked with the National Theatre of Scotland and the Dundee Rep, and is currently the producer of the Tayside Climate Beacon. So Anna, we'd like to hear from you, please.
Thank you so much, and I'm really glad to follow Dave's presentation because that was a great little outline of this incredible project, the Climate Beacons project, and I'm producing the Tayside Climate Beacon, and we're so delighted to be part of that project. I'm going to speak a little bit from my notes just so that I don't go completely off track. But yes, thank you so much for having me. This question, the role that culture has to play in climate action, is exactly the question we are wrestling with at the Tayside Climate Beacon. We're a network composed of arts, science, academic and community-focused organisations, from the Dundee Rep and Scottish Dance Theatre to the V&A, Abertay University, Bioregioning Tayside, Friends of the Earth Tayside, the James Hutton Institute, the Dundee Museum of Transport, and loads more, but I just want to give some of them a shout out. Brilliant partners. And we are asking this question: what is our collective power in shifting the needle on climate action issues in Tayside? And what is the role of the arts in that? And to lay my cards on the table, I am speaking to you as a theatre producer. I believe wholeheartedly in the power of live performance to create change, and that's why I'm in this business. It seems to me that climate change desperately requires internal and collective acts of transformation, and theatre knows something about that. When you come into a theatre, you are invited into a special space, somewhere between sacred and civic, where the rules of what can happen are up for grabs. We can use the magic of light, sound, set to transport ourselves to different places, mountaintops, moors, inside a home, sitting by the warmth of a fire. You're invited into a live, shared, collective moment. Real human beings are in front of you, looking you in the eye and telling you their stories. You're accountable. You can see them, but they can also see you. You are sat with strangers and you share an experience. You share intakes of breath, bursts of laughter. You might cry together. Research shows that our heartbeats synchronize when we're watching a play together. And you hear a story. Human beings have been standing up in front of each other and telling stories as a way to work out our place in the world since the beginning of time. Stories allow us to process emotion, to grieve or celebrate, and they help us to feel a connection to our community, a responsibility to our community, to nature, to those who have been and those who are coming after us. Stories can galvanize us, shift our understanding, and leave us fired up. And they can also ask difficult questions, trouble us. They can stick in our minds, and not everything has an easy solution. I have had the privilege of being visiting as an observer at COP, thanks to Creative Carbon Scotland, and it's been an incredible and bewildering experience. And as many of you may have seen, Elizabeth Watuti, the incredible Kenyan activist, electrified COP with her repeated call to action, open your hearts, open your hearts. I believe this is what theatre does. Intellectual understanding, facts, figures, and graphs can only take us so far when it comes to climate action. We need stories, we need collective experiences and accountability, and we need whole heart, mind, body presence. We need heartbeat synchronizing, and we need everyone together. Having been at COP, an issue that's come up a lot of times in conversation is around climate justice, and specifically who isn't present, who is excluded. At COP, I can see rooms that are dominated by older white men from the global north, the people who are statistically less at risk or will be less required to deal with the consequences of climate change. And since the pandemic struck our industry, inequality, access, and social justice is also something that the cultural sector is being asked to reckon with. This is something we urgently need to address, both for the survival of our art form and for the planet. If we're to mobilise the power of theatre and art in combating climate change, let it be the voices of those who have been historically excluded, who are leading with their stories and solutions. So what could the role of the performing arts be in tackling climate change? I can't answer this without thinking of art and the work that's caused my heart to beat faster. I think of Corinne Polwarth's incredible show, Wind Resistance, and I think art can create space for us to re-remember our innate connection to nature and our interconnectedness. I think of Hannah Lavery's work, Lament for Sheku Bayou, and I think that art can galvanise us to take action. It can shift the needle politically. I think of the Dundee Reps news production, This Is a Love Story, premiering tomorrow, which uses pop music and all of the joy and heartbreak and fun of that form to emotionally invest me in my relationship to the planet. And I would love to see more projects like the Climate Beacon project happening, more funding, support and space given for artists and our organisations to get into the room, to turn it into a space for transformation and gathering, to come together around a story and to open our hearts. Thank you.
Anna, thank you so much. So interesting to hear about the concept of theatres as transformative spaces, and the ability to open our hearts and minds to reach people, and particularly to reach those who are most at need. That's really interesting. We'll definitely pick up on some of that later on. That's wonderful. A few questions in the chat about the availability of the film, and I can tell you that this session is being recorded. The whole event is being recorded, and you will be able to access that again sometime after we finished on the Climate Ambition Zone website. We will also make the film available on a number of websites, but certainly the Creative Carbon Scotland website, possibly shortly after the COP. So after the end of next week, but I think what we would like to be able to do is to contact you all and email you to give you that link. So hopefully we can do that, because we're very, very keen for you all to have access to that film and share it and use it. As I said at the start, we don't want to keep this a secret. Right, let's move on to our next presentation. We're delighted to be joined today by Sir John Layton, who is the Director General of the National Galleries of Scotland. John, you have the floor.
Well, thank you for inviting me to speak. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be part of the session today. The world is at a turning point with an imperative for immediate and drastic action. And as that film shows so very well, the film we've just seen, culture, art, cultural institutions, we have a vital role to play in helping to make that change happen. I'd like to say a few brief words about what this can mean for my institution, the National Galleries of Scotland. Like so many organisations, we have an environmental response plan, and that outlines our approach to the climate emergency. And this identifies three priority areas for action: playing our part to achieve net zero, protecting our collections for future generations, and engaging and inspiring our audiences. Well, the first of those two priorities are, I suppose, pretty obvious. And while I could give you various examples of our activity to date, I would think that the main point to emphasize is how we have used the knowledge, the expertise of the sector to influence our decision making. And in turn, perhaps we've been able to influence some changes in recognized practice. I'll just give one example of that. When we undertook a major renovation of the Scottish National Portrait Gallery back in 2009 to 2011, we consulted with the sector to challenge perceived wisdom around methods of controlling the environment for the works of art. We were able to redesign completely the building management system, providing the conditions that we needed for our collections, but with much lower energy consumption. This shift allowed us to rethink our approach to lending works to organizations which might be perhaps less well resourced, with the end result of increasing the accessibility of our collection, while still ensuring that we safeguard it for the future. But that third priority that I mentioned of engaging and inspiring, it is one that sounds simple, but it does raise some strategic dilemmas. So, for example, how far should we go in actively programming issues relating to climate change in our exhibitions and our activities? How should this influence choices and decisions that we make around our engagement with contemporary artists? How best to mobilize the power, the drama of visual art without perhaps overwhelming or seeming to preach or even deterring our publics? Well, we're feeling our way through these questions, but we do know that museums, galleries and libraries, with our intergenerational missions, we are uniquely well placed to stimulate awareness through our collections that extend back across so many centuries, and with our long-term perspectives that look forward way into the future. There is here, I think, huge potential to engage our audiences with climate change and biodiversity, and to inspire them to visualize what change could look like. In the past few months alone, we have found several ways in the galleries to mobilize our collections and our program. And I just wanted to share a few examples to demonstrate this. For example, using the collection as a lens through which we can explore the effects of climate change, such as in our current exhibitions of photographs by Thomas Joshua Cooper entitled The World's Edge, an example here on the screen. As a starting point for conversations about biodiversity and rewilding, and for example, with a series of blogs which artist Patricia MacDonald has created for us, exploring through aerial photography the changing landscapes of the Cairngorms and the Western Isles. And also in creative activities where we invite our audiences to use their own art to show their visions of the natural world and how it's changing. Our art program for schools and families that often includes environmental themes, and our Art in the Open project that uses an e-cargo bike to take art materials into communities for participants to sketch their surroundings. It's been particularly exciting to see the responses to an engagement project that we've been working on with the National Library of Scotland in the run-up to COP, a project called Preserving Pasts, Imagining Futures. And it asks colleagues and it asks the public to respond creatively to images in both the library's collection and the gallery's collection, to respond to visualize how Scotland has been and will continue to be impacted by the climate and ecological emergency, unless decisive action is taken. We invited responses through social media. We also held a series of online and in-person workshops where we worked with a diverse range of groups and individuals. And I have to say that the inventiveness of the responses, and you can look at these at your leisure on our website and social media channels, I would describe those responses as breathtaking. We've seen photographs. We've received photographs that show how climate change is already impacting areas of Glasgow or North Uist or Edinburgh or Dunbar, and some hugely imaginative collages, including one from Fernhill School in South Lanarkshire, exploring how climate change may affect Scotland in the future. We also received creative writing responses, and that juxtaposition of different types of creative content, that's been one of the benefits of joining forces with the library. And that brings me finally back to the subject of collaboration and to its place in our endeavours to use culture as a driver for climate action. That film that we saw just a few moments ago, that was created as a result of a collaboration between several of Scotland's cultural bodies. None of us could have done that alone. And we all know that global issues such as the pandemic and climate change, these have ramifications and produce challenges for everyone, for all sectors, and culture is certainly not exempt. But it is only by working together in partnership with our fellow organisations and our colleagues that we can address these challenges and continue to showcase our heritage and collections to the wider public. A public whose need to access culture has surely never been greater than before. And as I think the film shows, perhaps the most important contribution that culture can offer is a real message of hope, a way of imagining a brighter, more optimistic future. Thank you very much.
Hi everybody, it's Ben Twist from Creative Carbon Scotland here, and we seem to have lost Ewan Hislop. Something's happened to the feed, so I'm taking over very briefly the chair, and I hope I'm correct in saying that I know who's coming next. But thanks very much, John Layton from the National Galleries, for speaking there and really making that strong connection between what art does and the big institutions and that collaborative approach to addressing climate change. And there has been a really phenomenal response. I'm the person who was foolish or lucky enough to bring together the institutions that have put the film together and put this event together. And it's been a very exciting journey watching how the different people bring different things in and the institutions have contributed different bits. I'm going to introduce now Tanya Bonotti, I think that's right, who is the director of culture, Creative Ireland, which is across the sea. There is an organisation that works on the application of culture in very different good creativity in many different ways, and they put an extraordinary project together which brought the climate change world, the climate change ministry actually, within Ireland together with the cultural world in a very tangible and real way. So I think it really follows on very well from what John Layton was saying. So I hope, I'm busking here slightly, I hope that the people behind us are ready to go with Tanya and her presentation. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ben, and greetings everybody from Dublin. Delighted to have the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about the Creative Ireland programme and specifically our initiative, which we're calling Creative Climate Action. I suppose first, just a line or two about the Creative Ireland programme itself and what is it, not to be confused with Creative Scotland, which is a body with a very different kind of purpose from ours. This was a programme set up by the Irish government back in 2017 with the big, hairy, audacious goal that they wanted to put creativity at the centre of public policy, and a real statement of confidence by the Irish government that as one of the first countries in the world to do so. They also asked Creative Ireland to demonstrate via the projects we do, what does good look like and how can culture and creativity contribute to the well-being of the people of Ireland, to economic development and to social inclusion. So it was, I guess, a belief by the Irish government in the power, picking up on what Anna said, that art can shift the needle politically, but this was the political system saying we recognise the power of art, culture and creativity. So just to give you a quick sense, we work with so many different government ministries and we report to the Office of the Prime Minister, which in Ireland is called the Department of the Taoiseach. But we work with a range of government ministries and state agencies and local authorities. And I guess a little bit of a background to creative climate action. And I don't think it'll be much different in Scotland, that there was probably a lack of awareness on the climate side of what culture could bring to the table. And when Creative Ireland was established, the Department of Climate Action was expected to work with the Department of Culture, which is where we're based. I think there was also a lack of confidence on the culture side as to what they could bring to the table. And frankly, a fear that they would be instrumentalized. And many of the artists I spoke with would sometimes say they were uncomfortable that they were there to help sort of serve the goals of the government. But I think the needle really shifted with a new programme for government, which was 2 years ago, where there was a specific commitment to link national cultural policy and national environmental policy. And I think that was a very brave and confident thing to do. So essentially what the Irish government grasped was the opportunity to link cultural policy and to inspire action. And this was led by two government ministers, the Minister for Culture and the Minister for Climate Action. And as the Minister for Culture said, if climate change is at its heart a cultural shift, then who better to lead that shift than the cultural sector? And essentially, very quickly, and that's the benefits of working in a small country, a fund was turned around worth €2 million, the first collaboration of its kind, and a real statement that culture should have that important role in environmental transformation. And I think the point is that this was top down and bottom up. So the vision came from the two ministers, but it was absolutely looking for collaborative projects that offer the means for people on the ground to engage with the urgent changes that are required. 15 projects have been given the green light for funding. And I suppose at its heart is really the move beyond awareness raising. As the Minister for Climate Action said to us, we're past that now, we're into behaviour change. How can these projects actually encourage that behaviour change? We also have an academic partner in UCC who's going to be tracking those 15 projects and really seeing what has been the impact of the projects that we're about to do on levels of engagement and levels of action in Ireland. We have a wide range of projects. The diversity of the themes will not surprise you. But we were really blown away by what the arts and creative sector came up with. But I think the point to underline here is that it was a galvanizer for conversations and relationships. And that's exactly what we wanted, particularly within the local authority, because obviously within local government, there is a culture team, and now there will be a climate action team. And oftentimes those things were running in parallel. We've really encouraged those things to get together. And we've also encouraged brokered partnerships between academics, community groups, and artistic and creative organizations. So just to give you two examples, two or three, I think, that would resonate perhaps with our Scottish audience. So here in Dingle in Kerry, one of the most westerly parts of the European Union, we're doing a project with the Dingle Creativity Hub. And this is, if you like, almost a micro project. What would it be like to have an artist embedded with 10 or 15 farmers for 18 months solid, as they begin to think about reducing their climate impact? We just thought there was something very bespoke and special about that project, and we're interested to see how it goes. Again, perhaps a resonance for our Scottish audience. A large part of the Midlands in Ireland are covered with peat bogs that were traditionally exploited as a fuel source. We've decided to support the Irish Architecture Foundation on a very interesting project that they're leading with 7 of the original villages built in the 1950s when people from all over Ireland moved to the Midlands to work on the bogs. And obviously now there's a massive transformation about to be undergone where those bogs will be rewilded and re-wetted. But those original worker villages still stand. So we're bringing in architects and landscape designers to co-design with the local community what they want those villages and particularly the public spaces in those villages to be. Picking up on that theme of the need to have local government really important sort of partner for us, Limerick City and County Council, who have already been working in this area, have come together to work with 5 Limerick communities, some of them areas of great social deprivation. And it's focused on bringing together all the talents that exist in Limerick from the artistic community and the academic community in Limerick, together with local government and community groups. So we're very interested to see how those things go. I'm more than happy to talk about the projects. This is our website, which has a lot more detail if you're interested. And thank you very much.
Tanya, thank you so much for that amazing, comprehensive description from top down to bottom up, and particularly appealing the top down approach, the partnership coming from government and recognizing the role of culture in driving change. And we'll discuss this more, I'm sure. A groundbreaking piece of work. Fantastic to hear. Let's move on. And our next contribution, I'm delighted to welcome Helen Vincent. Helen is head of rare books, maps and music at the National Libraries of Scotland. Helen, please.
Thanks, Ewan. As one of the people who was involved with Ben and with Ewan in putting the film together, it's been really great to see it come alive, and thanks to everybody attending for taking an interest in what we've been doing. So John Layton has mentioned our collaboration with the National Galleries on preserving pasts, imagining futures, and that was another great project to work on as to how our collections might inspire people responding to climate issues. And also, like the National Galleries of Scotland and other cultural institutions in this country, at the National Library, we're developing responses to the demands of the climate crisis in how we manage our collections, how we manage our buildings, and how we inspire and engage others. But what I want to do right now is speak more broadly about the role of libraries in responding to the climate crisis. And in this, I'm speaking not only about the National Library of Scotland, but also drawing on my experiences in IFLA, the International Federation of Library Associations, the main international body of libraries of all kinds from around the world, from big national libraries to the local libraries found in every community. Libraries straddle the divide between culture and information, everything from passionate nature writing to the most dry but useful scientific information and practical advice. Libraries are powerful community spaces, powerful when, as they can be approachable spaces that people feel are theirs to enter, spaces for debate, for evolving new ideas, whether as a lone researcher in a reading room or as a lively group working together. Libraries are keepers of cultural memory and local knowledge. I think about the National Library of Scotland's extensive digitised map collections, which provide people with the opportunity to trace changing coastlines and other environmental features. We are currently involved with an international research project using our historical maps of India to trace water sources in the Coimbatore region of that country. I think about a more local project to Scotland, the mapping project based at Linnaclate Library in North Uist, part of the Outer Hebrides Climate Beacon collaboration, to record local knowledge about and emotional responses to the land they live in. These are specific projects, but I hope you can see the potential for libraries around the world to develop similar responses relevant to their own contexts. Libraries are authoritative information sources, again, when they live up to their potential to be trusted providers of information, and librarians to theirs as trusted navigators through the information labyrinth, both the library collections and the people who work in them, helping citizens negotiate the work of responding to the climate crisis. A very topical and recent example, in October, the Scottish Government launched its heat and building strategy, setting out a pathway to zero emissions buildings by 2045. A key aspect, certainly one the media seized on, was about the potential for heat pumps as heating sources. The National Library of Scotland can offer anyone who registers with us access to 867 articles in heat engineering periodicals alone about heat pumps, as well as in other sources. That's an example relevant to the kind of work a National Library does, but it could be equally useful for someone to be able to borrow a repair manual for their local library, or for a local government to be able to ask for help in finding the best information on traditional building materials to rethink how they construct their schools. Finally, while libraries are there to help people engage with adaptation in response to policymakers, they're also there to help those who want to challenge that policy, whether what they want is to urge faster action, to correct errors, or to develop alternatives. Often culture is seen as the thing which is nice to have when other needs have been met. The fact is that when we're talking about responding to the climate crisis, culture is no longer nice to have, but is essential to preserve the memory of landscapes and communities which have been altered beyond recognition, to support people whose lives have been disrupted by the climate crisis or by the changes required of them in response to it, people whose communities and families have been dispersed by migration, whose buildings have been damaged by flood or rainfall, who need to rethink the homes they live in and how they travel. Culture is there to help people find answers, practical or inspirational, to the question, what should I do in response to the climate emergency in which the world finds itself? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Helen. A really powerful argument, I think, there for the role of cultural institutions, and specific with libraries, fascinating the connection between the role of the national institution right down to local libraries providing community spaces and safe spaces for conversations and discussions. And the concept of keepers of cultural memories, but also practical memories and technical information, engineering information, etc. Fantastic to hear that. We'll move on to our final contribution from our 6 speakers today. And this is from James Curran, another person from outside of the cultural sector. James is, like Dave Ray, a very well-known contributor to climate change policy and action across Scotland and beyond. James is chair currently of Climate Ready Clyde, but he's formerly chair of the James Hutton Institute and also former chief executive of Scotland's Environmental Protection Agency. So we're fascinated to hear what James has got to say about the role of culture in climate change and climate action. James.
Hi, I'm James Curran and I'm chair of Climate Ready Clyde, a partnership programme that has developed and recently published a climate change adaptation strategy and action plan for Glasgow City region. The whole purpose being to create a region in which we can all continue to flourish as climate change imposes bigger and bigger impacts on everything around us and the way we lead our lives. One of the partners was Creative Carbon Scotland, and we really appreciated the challenge that they gave us, not only in the way that we interacted as partners on the project, but in the way that we would put together the strategy and the action plan, and most particularly in the way that we would communicate it to others, those who are actually in a position to deliver it. Because by its nature, climate change adaptation needs to be transformational and hugely cross-sectoral. Think of one little example. Say we want to create a new green space in a town or city to provide some cool shading as climate change drives temperatures higher. We need to think about all the co-benefits of that green space. It could be used for an outdoor cafe. It could also incorporate a play space for children or adults. It should certainly incorporate pathways to allow people to walk to the shops or to work or to school, and indeed to walk to bus stops and train stations so that we get out of our cars and have healthier lifestyles. It could incorporate a soak away so that the heavier rainfall we'll experience under climate change can soak away, drain away into the soil, slowing it down and purifying it in order to reduce the amount and extent and damage of flooding downstream with all the cost and stress and anxiety to communities. So immediately there's a huge number of actors involved in creating that small green space. And that takes really creative, imaginative, innovative kind of communication to get all of those actors involved, participating and engaged. That doesn't come very naturally to engineers, to builders, to scientists or technicians like myself. And that's where the culture and arts community can really, really help. They can reach out and engage with the emotions and the intellect. You know, sustainable development is all about capturing those benefits, the economic benefits, the social benefits, and the environmental benefits. But I've always thought that sustainable development is more than that. It's about heart, head, and hands. And the culture and arts community can really engage with the hearts and the head, the emotions and the intellect. The engineers and the technicians can do the hands bit, but they really need the support and should seek out the support of the culture and arts community to get those messages across. Because I think all of us want to create that future in Glasgow City region where we can flourish. That future for Scotland where we have healthier, happier, more enjoyable lives. That future for the whole world where we're safer. Thank you.
James, thank you so much. How we continue to flourish through transformational change and the role of culture and creativity. I think really interesting to hear a recognition from someone like James, who's coming from that side of science, of engineers and technical specialists, about the value of culture and its ability to engage and have those conversations and make meaningful difference. So a really interesting contribution there. That's the last of our 6 interventions, and we're going to move on for the rest of the event for our panel questions. So I'm delighted to welcome onto the panel 4 of our speakers, Anna, John, Tanya, and Helen, and we're going to be joined by Ben Twist, and we will take some questions from the audience, and there's some fantastic reaction coming in. Also just observing the mixture of people who've joined us today, and it's fascinating to see such a range of attendees, I think, way beyond the arts, culture, heritage sector. We've got people joining us from central and local government, from funding bodies, from academic institutes, and also consultancy and business. So it's fascinating just to see who's actually signed up for this and is interested in the topic today. And I think possibly a good question to kick off with really sort of does relate to that in terms of tying across different sectors. There's a question which I think maybe Tanya, I'll put that to you, because this is about how can those charged in local government particularly tap into culture. Do you have any tips or advice for those first steps? People who are not experienced in engaging with that sector. How do we do that? How do we make that leap across and connect?
Well, I suppose there were 2 questions there from Ruth Bourne. The first was local authorities getting their act together, to be crude about it. And I suppose one of the things that we found really powerful was when local authorities who traditionally have siloed, there's the chief librarian and the arts officer and the heritage officer and the events officer and the climate change officer. And what we have done in Ireland is to create what are known as culture and creativity teams in every local authority. They also bring together the enterprise and economic development person. And that has led to all kinds of really innovative work by local government. So the first thing is local government within itself, making sure that the different departments talk to each other. And I think the second piece really is there's a job of work, obviously, for those cultural spaces to make themselves more inviting and open, but we're not waiting for that. So a large amount of our projects will be taking place outside those buildings, in the community, on the ground, out in the open, in local halls, you name it. So we're not relying only on the cultural spaces themselves to deliver the engagement, albeit the engagement will be led by artists, creatives, and the local community working together.
Thank you.
So I could come in there.
I was going to ask you to come in, Ben.
Well, that's very good. I would say the first thing to do actually is just start the conversations. And I would urge the climate people in the local authorities who are always overstretched and never have enough resource and enough time to go around the office and find where the cultural people are lurking and say, can you help? Are you interested? Because I think what we've discovered at Creative Carbon Scotland is that there's an enormous amount of support for climate action, and people within the cultural sector are desperate to contribute. So I think there will be connections found, and I think the work of Tanya in Ireland has really demonstrated this. The bringing together of those people with, fair enough, the offer of money has been very powerful, when we were setting up the Climate Beacons project, there's really a relatively small amount of money available, but an enormous number of conversations started between different people who wanted to do things. We haven't managed to fund them all, but lots and lots of conversations are continuing. So really, I think it takes a little bit of leadership, somebody saying, actually, we're here, we want to make this happen, so come and talk to us. And I think there's a responsibility or an opportunity on both sides, culture, climate, but also anybody else within the local authority to just say, let's start talking. And we have a great project in Creative Carbon Scotland called the Green Teas, which started literally with a kettle, a box of tea bags and a plate of biscuits. And we said, let's sit down together and talk about collaboration. It's been going since 2013, all sorts of things. Get your kettles out, get your biscuits out, and start talking to each other, I think, is the answer.
And I think there's an interesting point there post-pandemic about where we are with many with many libraries and public spaces and some of the difficulties, and perhaps a recognition that there's an additional role, there's an additional value and role that they can perform. So I think, yeah. I was interested in Anna. You were talking about climate justice, and we touched on just transitions as well. There's a question here about a consciousness that many people don't feel they can relate to some cultural spaces, and the sort of difficulties in people feeling comfortable or feeling that they don't belong to them, and just your thoughts really on that, on how to inspire people and welcome people in.
I think it's just about giving folk the keys to those spaces, basically, and letting those be the voices that are leading and in charge. And sometimes that's going to mean that some of us need to get out of the way and let the people who have not had access, who have been historically excluded, come into that space and do what they want to do with it. And it might not look exactly like what our plans for it should be, or what our objectives are, and I think being open to that. But yeah, I think it's really crucial for the recovery of the cultural sector post-pandemic that happens, and I think it's crucial for the climate action movement that those voices are centered and leading, and otherwise we won't succeed. So I think that it's it has to be key to recovery and how we're moving forward, basically.
Thank you. John, can I ask you about with that in mind, the role of a national institution, the sort of large scale body? We've seen some very inspiring initiatives from national galleries, and you described some of those, which are very far reaching. And I get the sense that some of the responses have been perhaps surprising in a way, and really sort of revealing the imagination and the desire of people to engage.
Yeah, absolutely. If I may, I'm just going to pick up also at something that you were speaking to Anna about, which was I think really powerful, really important, but which is how all that we've been talking about in terms of climate change also relates to social equity and ideas of accessibility and inclusion. And just from the perspective of a national organization with international ambitions, I think one of the challenges for us is that, like so many cultural organizations, we've been working to what you might call a growth model. More people, more tourists, more funding, keep on expanding. And I think that there's a really huge challenge for us to see whether we can switch away from that to a different approach, which is more about the diversity of those audiences, different types of people coming in, a wider reach, if you like, rather than simply expanding all the time, and putting social responsibility more at the heart of what we do, And I don't see really any difference between the issues of climate change, social equity, social responsibility, and putting those at the center, rather than, I say, this constant drive towards more audiences. Your question about the inspiration from coming from the public. Again, I think this is about a different kind of relationship, which is less about organizations like mine broadcasting or being almost in a patronizing relationship with their public. It's about letting go of some of that responsibility, listening differently, and allowing your public to respond, and unleashing some of that massive creativity that we've experienced through the lockdown. And that's a really powerful tool, and I think a really important part of what we're talking about today.
So I think a sense there that we're actually doing a lot of this stuff already. So our sector is already engaging in a way that can easily incorporate climate change action and climate change objectives alongside all these other initiatives and the way our sector is going. Ben, would you like to come in there?
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity for those cultural spaces to be used by different people, and I'm sort of intrigued just listening to the speakers there. What happens if you have a climate change talk? This is really what we're doing at the Beacons in many ways. What happens if you bring climate change people into the theatres, into the libraries, into the galleries, and the people who are listening about climate change, who may be worried about their local flooding, or maybe concerned about their heating bills, or what they're going to do about these blessed heat pumps. What happens if they listen to those conversations surrounded by old masters? What happens if they listen to those conversations in a theatre setting? And is there a way to actually open up those spaces as town squares, if you like, at a time when actually an awful lot of public space has been make those spaces available to climate change people who are working in all sorts of ways related to climate justice and social equity as well. But actually those conversations are had, the questions are answered, might be a little show about heat pumps, are answered in a different space that actually is about community and is about imagination and creativity. Maybe that's a better place to do it than in a dreary village hall or something that is rather more sort of civic feeling. If you put it in the red plush of the Lyceum Theatre in Edinburgh, what difference does that make to the conversation and the ideas that people have? So I think there's actually an opportunity for those theatres, those galleries, whatever, to ring up the climate change people and say, look, we've got some great spaces here. Come along and use them, and we'll both benefit from that. You'll invite different people in who may come back on another occasion, but also the conversations that we have and that you have with those people will be different. And I just want to go back also to Helen's point about the wonder of community libraries, which are extraordinary cultural spaces and are very, very accessible and are already doing this. I think this happens already a lot in libraries, so we shouldn't forget them, I would say.
Well, I think that's a really important point about the content of these spaces, the fact that libraries, museums, galleries contain the knowledge of the past, the how we got to here, how we got to this place, and perhaps actually, those are very good spaces for having those conversations, because climate change is the next step.
And your bit of the world, Ewan, with your historic spaces, the heritage, is particularly good for that. I would have thought we can explore that future while sitting in the past. Extraordinary.
I think so. I think it's that sort of concept of there has always been change. Society has always changed, physically, intellectually, in terms of its knowledge and etc. And I think I think our sector really does hold the key to that. So climate change, the transformations that are required are the next step. So perhaps we do offer a more comfortable anchor point, if you like, in which to have those conversations. And just onto that point about the collections and the artifacts themselves, Helen, within the actual content of our institutions, there's an intrinsic value within those items, presumably as well, to tell some of those stories about change, about past changes.
Yes, and I see that somebody has asked about how we use them more effectively in our stories. And I think that is work that all of us who work with cultural heritage objects of all kinds, whether it's documentary heritage or museum objects or art, we have to think about reframing these objects in the light of the things that people want to know about now and the subjects that interest them. Quite often we have inherited traditional narratives about the things in our collections, which might be focused on who are the great people in history, or what is this history, what is the importance of an item in its relation to local history or social history, or how do we reframe them in the context of what does this tell us about the environment? What does this tell us about how people lived in an environment which is changing? Is this something which we're saying that we're drawing a line that doesn't happen anymore? Are we saying this is something that can inspire us as we go into the future? So we have to do that work ourselves to reposition the objects responding to climate change. It's very similar to the work we're also doing, thinking about other kinds of diversity, other kinds of news stories that the world today is asking us to tell.
Well, there's a question that maybe allows us to tease that out a bit more. A question in terms of, do we have the required skills for our staff to be able to do that? And I think perhaps some reticence for us to be able to put ourselves into those uncomfortable spaces and uncomfortable conversations, or what we may perceive as being uncomfortable, take us out of our comfort zone effectively. Anna, I feel this is very much your territory. I mean, you talked about challenging and within a theatre space. I mean, that's kind of what you do. It's provocation, and you guys aren't afraid to challenge. But maybe some of us in the sort of museums and galleries and heritage world and libraries are less, or feel less confident.
There's loads of radical librarians and curators out there, and yeah, I think that the uncomfortability bit is the most important bit in all of these discussions. So when we're talking about climate action, it's not going to be comfortable. Whatever changes we need to make to kind of save our planet, save the future, is not going to be a comfortable thing. We need to just become at ease with discomfort, and that might be discomfort for us who work in the culture sector, feeling out of our depth. I've felt so discomforted being at COP. I'm so out of my depth and so in over my head, and I feel like that's useful. It's useful for me to be there, to be like jostling with myself a little bit at the conference, and that there's growth happening if I'm discomforted. So I think in the question of skills, I think we can't wait until we're skilled up. We can't hold back until we have all the information we need to do something. It's okay that those of us in the culture sector are coming at this with different types of knowledge and different kinds of languages, different ways of thinking about things, and I think that that's also the beauty of the Climate Beacons project, is that we're really seeing that we're all coming here with like different kinds of knowing and different kinds of skill sets, and putting them on the table together. And if we feel discomfort, if we feel a little bit ill at ease, if we feel a little bit scared, it's probably good things that are happening, and we should lean into that. I hope that answers the question.
I think that's really interesting. And I mean, my take from that is none of us has a right to be comfortable, because if you think of climate change, the inequities associated with climate change, we know that climate change will impact most on those who are least empowered to do anything about it. So I think there's a duty on all of us to shift and take on that role. John?
I would just echo what Anna's saying, but in terms of skills required, I don't think there are any special skills required that we don't either have or need to have mobilized for other things. In terms of visual artists have always in some ways been the canaries in the coal mine of society. They've often been producing art about ideas that are far from the mainstream and provocative and so on. And I think museums, galleries are used to presenting that and facilitating that and handling that. I think artists have the ability to create absolutely unforgettable, memorable, provocative images that can help to influence attitudes and thinking. But I'm not thinking that there are special skills required that we don't need or have already to do this.
And I guess a key point from there is the audiences that we reach. I mean, we have massive engagements, and we are experts in engagement already. So why not add to that in terms of climate action, and use that power that we already have to broaden the message. Someone else had their hand up, I think. Did anyone else want to come in on that? Helen?
Yeah, Anna was talking about discomfort, and it made me think, well, there are other emotions involved in people's responses to climate change. There can be, as well as positive inspiration and celebration and hope, there is also loss and there is also anger. And I think that one way that the arts and creative industries and heritage can really help people is negotiating these emotions. But that is a skill set. Quite often, I think, as cultural institutions, we are looking to show how wonderfully we celebrate our cultures, and thinking about how we work collaboratively and sustainably, and how we work with these more difficult and challenging emotions, and how we provide a space for people to express them and work through them, is a challenge for us.
Well, there's a particularly inspiring comment come in from someone in the audience who's basically said, don't forget the beauty, the inspiration, the human ingenuity that we are able to showcase, that gives us hope as well. So we're talking about discomfort and difficulties, but there is that other side to, as custodians of culture, that sort of ability to inspire and human endurance, I think, is another very important message that we can bring to the table. Ben?
Yeah, and I think what Anna was saying about that sharing, if you like, and the sharing of emotions is really important here. That I'm a theatre director by trade, and one of the things I love about theatre is the fact that an audience comes together for a special occasion and shares a particular journey through a play and through a set of emotions. And that set of emotions might be hilarious, it might be a farce, which lampoons or satirizes the problems, the questions that a society is asking, or it might also be a tragedy. And I'm thinking back in a way here to Greek tragedy or Greek theatre, when ancient Greece used to have more or less compulsory theatre festivals that the free men, it was at the time, had to attend. And those plays that they were presenting would present tragedy and they would present comedy about the society that was being formed, about the way that society might be or should be. And actually that sharing together, the going through that, I think eases as well as supports people through that discomfort. And we all know we're doing it collectively, we're doing it together, we're not alone in this. And I think that's a really important part of cultural spaces. It doesn't just happen with theatre, it also happens with music and indeed with galleries and whatever. I remember going to see Guernica in Madrid. There's the Picasso picture there of the Spanish Civil War, and there's a sense of awe that you share with the other people in the room at the same time. And one other thing to say just about the special skills and what have you. The thing is that climate change is not going to be solved by one lot of people. It requires engineers, it requires scientists, it requires politicians and economists, and it requires cultural people. And I think the thing that we can perhaps do in culture, we're good at bringing people together, at making those connections. It's what the Climate Beacons are doing, that's what Tanya's doing in Ireland, is actually saying, come and talk to each other. We'll put all these different skills, all these different knowledges together so that we can solve this problem, not so that anybody has to do it on their own with their own individual bit of knowledge.
Can I just pick up on the skills piece, Evan, because I think one of the things that struck me recently is we have an extensive program around creativity in schools, and there's quite a lot of people, I think it's not to minimize the skills that our community brings to this, who are really brilliant creative facilitators. Now, they may be doing it for young people in a theatre setting, but those kind of skills around creative facilitation that we do really well, for example, in the performing arts, or the kind of skills that really good designers who are used to working with local communities and architects, like those are skills that lots of people don't have. So I think we shouldn't kind of underestimate the sort of things that we can bring to the table when we go and have conversations with the other people that Ben mentioned.
Thank you, Tanya. I think that's really interesting, and there's been quite a bit of chat about the examples you gave us, Tanya, and the position that you're in, where your government has made those connections right away. But I think I'm fascinated. So skills and communication, how's that looking on the ground? So you gave some examples about some difficult sectors. So agriculture is agriculture. Carbon emissions from agriculture is a major issue, and there needs to be a transformational shift in agriculture. You talked about the peat extraction as well, which is a fundamental reversal in policy, if you like, and leading to dramatic changes in people's livelihoods, with all the economic and social disruption that goes hand in hand with that. How does the cultural sector have those conversations, and where are the commonalities?
Well, I suppose the trite answer is ask us in 18 months, because there are some specific projects, because no more than in Scotland, the agricultural community in Ireland feels that they're being blamed and scapegoated, and they're worried. And I think what we felt when we got proposals from different farming communities and artistic groups, that we just thought there was something really interesting about that. You know, what would an embedded artist with 10 farmers in Dingle do for a year and a half? And how will that change how the farmers feel about their own farming practice? So these are kind of longer term embedded community projects. And I suppose we'll also learn what doesn't work. So I don't know that we know that yet, but I think we're going to be interested to find out, because I think along the way we'll figure out the things that didn't work, and that'll be as important as the things that did. But we are lucky, I guess, in Ireland. I am conscious in the chat hearing from Scotland and Northern Ireland that, you know, the funding situation is very challenging. And I suppose we're in a lucky situation that the Irish government has really, we have historically high levels of funding for our Arts Council, Screen Ireland, and the Heritage Council. So our problem is in fact not funding.
Thank you for that last point, because there's quite a lot of discussion in the chat about that, about funding, about the lack of funding for cultural institutions and for our sector, and yet the recognition, the emerging recognition from the sector of the importance and the value that it has. But perhaps some of that is for us in our sector to stand up and shout a bit louder, and make it known that we have a significant role to play going forward.
I think the case making, I think you'll agree, Ben, like, because Ben has been part of our process here in Ireland. When we first went to the Ministry of Climate Action, there was a certain puzzlement, you know, the arts and climate action, well, kind of not hostility, but what does that really mean? But once you can bring it to life and go, this is the incredible way we can help you with your public engagement challenge. And I'm sure the same is true in Scotland. There is literally a considerable sum of money being ring-fenced by ministries of climate action all over Europe for engagement with the public. So sometimes we need to go out there and make that case stronger.
That's right, and I think one of the important things is to say we're not seeking money for art, if you like. We want to help here. I think we need to make an offer rather than ask for more. Often artists feel like they're asking for more, or seem like they're asking for more, but actually it's saying, look, we've got these skills to offer, and just picking up on those skills. I think it's really important to remember it's not just about communication, it's about other things. And James Curran touched upon this in the work we did with Climate Ready. we didn't do any part. What we encouraged them to do was to start meetings or read a poem or actually write some poetry. We had local authority people, engineers and what have you, writing haikus about climate change adaptation. And there was a certain reluctance at first when we started doing this. But what happened as time went on, we did some surveys at the end of it, and it turned out that people participated differently in the meetings. They started feeling like they were part of a different sort of group, and they'd unlocked certain bits of their brains and so on. So we would spend 15 minutes at the meeting doing some imagining or whatever it may be. Then they'd get on to the 2-hour business of quite a technical meeting. And they felt that they had achieved different things, different questions had arisen. They'd participated in a more positive and complementary way with each other. They were listening to each other in a different way. So I think there are all sorts of things that artists and cultural creatives can do here. And they're going to be different for different projects. So I think it's again that question of bringing these people together. What do you need in climate change? Okay, let's see if we've got ways in which you can help here, and actually making sure it's an offer. And so the cultural people that are listening today, I would say, ring up your climate change folk and find out their emails or their numbers and give them a call and say, look, we want to help. But equally, the climate change people, seek out those cultural partners and say, look, you may be able to help here. We've got a problem. We don't know how to solve it because there are lots of problems in climate change we don't know how to solve. Is there something that you could do to help us on that front?
Thank you, Ben. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I feel we could go on for a lot longer. The conversations have been very rich and wonderful. We've had some tremendous chat. I'm sorry we can't respond to all the questions, but I'm going to have to wind us up. Fantastic contributions from all of you. Thank you so much, everyone, for speaking. I think what we've heard from our non-culture people, from Dave and James, has been really fascinating. That fundamental recognition of the importance of people and cultural organizations and their ability to give voices to communities, to play the role in shaping the transformational changes that are coming, and to challenge and have difficult conversations, and to give a voice to people otherwise wouldn't be heard. We heard from Anna, who's spoken to us about the importance of theatre spaces and cultural spaces to bring people in as safe spaces to have those conversations, to address these issues. From Tanya, about the value of the top-down driven connectivity across government, but how that is able to tap into ground-up projects in quite, I think, a groundbreaking way, and experimental, if you like. And I think we'll be watching with fascination, Tanya, as your project continues. And from Helen, about the role of our institutions as keepers of cultural memories at national scale and at local community scale. And again, that concept of safe spaces to have those conversations. And from John, I think the power of using collections to engage and inspire, and the strength of collaboration and working together, but also the leadership that our national institutions can take, both in terms of the practical aspects, if you will, of climate change, of carbon reduction, of challenging the environmental conditions under which we've stored collections in the past, and making strong practical progress that sends a signal out to our sector. So thank you to all for that wonderful set of contributions and discussion. I think for me, the take-home message is climate change is a human problem. We're hearing from scientists and politicians and engineers and technical people, but to make that step change that we need to make, people, it's about people, and culture has to be at the heart of that and is the catalyst for change. I'd just like to acknowledge those who've helped put this programme together. Our hosts, Event Scotland, on behalf of the Scottish Government's COP26 programme, Scotland's Climate Ambition Zone, and thanks to David Martin for doing the technical work behind the scenes. To our event organiser, Ben Spencer, a fantastic job for keeping keeping us all in order and keeping the programme going. And to the creators of our film, Steve Smith and Fergus Haycock from Picture Zero Productions, and Jude Lightbody for producing the film, and to all the national cultural bodies who came together to make this happen. The Scottish Library and Information Council, National Libraries of Scotland, National Galleries, National Museums, the Museums Gallery Scotland, Historic Environment Scotland, Creative Scotland, and last but not least to Creative Carbon Scotland, in particular Ben Twist and the team for convening the group and making this all happen. Thank you very much for listening. As I said at the start, we will be able to put the recording of this event online onto the Ambition Zone platform. We will be able to let you know, I hope, when the film goes live, and we'll send you a link to that. And we encourage you all to please engage with climate change, make your voices heard, and remember, climate change is an urgent problem and we need to do this now. Thank you very much and goodbye.